Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to implement Google Sign In and Sign Up API with NestJS using Firebase. Now, the popular way to do this in NestJS or any backend framework or any Node.js backend framework is usually with Passport.js. But if you have tried it before, you will know that it can get a bit messy, lots of boilerplate and configuration. So in this video, I will show you a simpler approach using Google's API package. I will create a mini front end to test it and connect everything together. By the end of this video, you will have a working system where users can log in with Google or sign up with Google. Their account gets created in the backend if it doesn't exist, and you generate a JWT token for authenticated API request. Let's get started. So this flowchart is showing us how the process that are going to take place down to the part where you are going to send JWT to the user. So the first thing is the user lands on your website, right? Then clicks on login with Google or sign up with Google. So once the user clicks on that particular button, your client app in this case can be your mobile app, your web app, or whatever, initiates a communication OAuth with Google. Then this is where the pop-up screen comes into play, where the user grants the client app permission to access certain data. After this has been done, Google returns us an ID token. This ID token, we are then going to send it to the backend API. The backend API is going to validate it. Then backend API will then use that token to validate and call the Google API to ensure that the token that has been passed is safe. Then we check our database if the user exists. If the user exists, we retrieve the user, generate a JWT, then send it to the client. Then the client can decide to store the token either in local storage or in cookie or whatever. Then the same thing, if the user does not exist, then we have to create a new user, generate a JWT for that user, send it to the client, and client stores the JWT for future requests. Now, enough of theory, let's get into it. Before we continue, if you are enjoying this, hit that like button. It is free. It tells me that this video was actually useful. Don't stop making them. Subscribing, that is basically you saying, I want more of this. And if you share it, you have officially become the friend who puts people onto cool stuff. Simple actions, but honestly, they keep me motivated to keep creating this nice content. We are going to install some packages such as NestJS JWT and Google APIs. And the NestJS JWT is basically what we are going to be using to generate our JWT or JWT token. And the Google API is what we are going to be using to connect to Google to validate the token that has been sent to us by the clients. Then for database access, we are going to be using typeorm, and I will be using SQLite to keep things simple. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to install the authentication packages. Now that I've installed the authentication packages, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to install the JWT or SQLite package database packages. So remember, we are using typeorm and SQLite just to keep things pretty simple. Now that that is done, the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and set up our database. In order to set up our database, we need to head to app module, and we need to import the typeorm module like so, and we need to set the type as SQLite. I need to import this. Make sure that you are importing the typeorm module from the NestJS typeorm package. The next thing we need to do is define the database, and I'm just going to call it db.sqlite, And the next thing I'm going to define is synchronize true. So this will help us automatically generate database schema. And we need to define entities. So we are here to create our entities, right? So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to generate all the modules that we need, right? And the modules that we need here are basically the auth module and the user module. So to do that, I will head back to our terminal, next generate module, and I'm going to call it auth. I'm also going to generate the user module, call it users, or just user is fine, or user, anyone you like. You can call it anything you like. So now that we've generated the modules, I'm going to be creating the service and controller that we need. And where we need a service is in the auth module and in the user module. So I'm going to do next generate service in the auth module. This will help us create a service in the auth module. Then also I want to create a controller like so in the auth module. Then the next place we need a service is in the user module. Good. So now that we have all of those built for us, I'm going to remove the spec because we are now writing tests, and I'm going to remove this and this as well. I'm going to delete that now. Good. Okay, now that we've generated our modules, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to implement the user, or I'm going to create the user entity class. Entity. Now, the user entity class basically just needs some basic data. I expect you to already have an entity in your own application. So I'm going to export class, and it's going to be, I'm going to be using primary generated column, and it's going to be UUID. I'm going to import this and import this as well. And this will be a string. The next column that I need is the email column, and I will ensure that the email column is unique. True column, import it as well. The next thing that we need is probably I think we are good with this, since this is just a demo. In an actual application, you will definitely have more columns than I have. So, but let's say, for example, you have another column, let's call it name. So this column, I will make it nullable. I'll call it name. And you may have another column, let's say picture. This will also be a string. And I'm going to copy that and paste. Okay, now that we have our user entity, the next thing we need to do is to ensure that we register our user entity in our typeorm module. So that way, if once we start the application, a new database or a new schema is generated for that particular entity. So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm just going to implement the user service. And the user service is going to contain the method for finding user by email address, and the method for creating the user, and also the method for finding a user by ID. And in order to do that, all I need to do is create a constructor. And in our constructor, I will be injecting the user entity repository. Okay. And so that will be private read-only user repository right there from typeorm. So the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new method called create. And the create method, we accept user data. which will be a partial of user. So in order to, I'm going to create a new user, which will be equals to this dot user repository dot create. Then we save the user just like that. The next thing is we need another method for finding a user by email. Find by email, and this will return and await this the user where by email address. I don't know why this is complaining. Okay, this can either be null, can also be null. Correct. So the next thing I need is a method to find by ID. By ID, and this will be ID, and this will be ID, like so. Now that we are done with our user service, the next thing we need to do is we need to go into the Auth service, Auth module, and import the user module so that we will be able to use those services that we've created. So let me also ensure that the user module is exporting the user service. Ensure that it is exported, otherwise you'll not be able to perform the necessary implementations. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to register the JWT module. So the JWT module will be coming from the NestJS JWT package, and I'm going to be importing. You can see it's coming from the NestJS JWT package. You can use Passport for your own. It depends on your, but since this is just for a demo, this also works, and you can use Passport or any form of authentication that you are using. So I'm just going to type in some stuffs here. I advise that you move this to an environment variable. Let me just leave that comment. Move to environment variable. Yeah. So aside that, we need to indicate that it is global so that we can use it anywhere. Then we also need to include the sign options. And here I will just say it expires in 1 day. Now that we've actually done that, we can start using our JWT service in our Auth service, right? So to start with, I need to create a constructor, and I need to import private read-only JWT service. And we need to import the JWT service from NestJS JWT. We also need to import the user service, read-only user service. Okay, I'm going to remove this and import from our user service. So I'm going to head back to our browser and go to Firebase console. I'm going to, okay, so I'm supposed to go to console. So I'm going to be creating a new Firebase project, and I'm going to call it code with T, NestJS social auth. Let me put some separation. Yeah, NestJS code with social auth. And continue, just press keep calling to continue. Then I'm going to create the project. So this will take some couple of minutes to completely generate. Okay, now our Firebase app project has been created. So once you create a project, you need to actually add an application. So I'm going to add, and I'm going to be adding a web application because I'll be testing with a web application. So I'm going to call it, let's say, NestJS Google. You can call it anything you like, or let me just call it nice app. And I'm going to register the app. Yeah. Okay. Now that we've actually generated or created a new Firebase application, the next thing I want to do is create a client project where we'll be using this Firebase configuration. So I'm going to head to my terminal and run this vite code right here and click. So I'm going to call it client, and I'm going to be using vanilla JavaScript and the likes. Then I'm going to be running npm install right there. Okay, we need to enter the client folder and do npm install. Okay, good. Now that we have that done, if we run npm run dev, we should have that application running on localhost 5173. You can see. So if we come to our code editor, we can see the folder. So I'm going to remove everything in counter. In fact, I'm going to delete the file. Yeah, delete anyway. And I'm going to remove everything right here. Now we are going to have a blank application. And I'm going to create a button. I'm going to give it an ID of login button, and I'm going to create another one. Okay, let me just call it sign up button. Yeah, I'm going to sign up with Google. All right, so this basically is stating the particular button that is going to be on your web page or whatever. Now remember, we have this Firebase configurations here, so I need to install all of this in the client parts. Remember to ensure that you are inside the client folder. Please ensure you are inside the client folder. We'll wait for that to install. Then I'm going to copy this into the main.js like so. I'm going to remove all of these guys and remove these guys as well. And remove this guy. I'm going to also remove this. I don't need analytics. So now that we've actually generated the client application and the app, I'm going to go into the app and ensure that I enable authentication for Google. So this is how you do that. You just enable. Once you enable it, everything is good. I've enabled. Okay, that has been enabled. If we refresh, come to Google Web SDK, enable Google sign-in. We've already, okay, enable. Okay, we need to do this, then save. So the good thing is, now that we've saved and we've enabled Google, we have the client ID, but we don't have the client secret. In order to retrieve the client secret, all we need to do is visit the Google Cloud Console dashboard, this URL, and I'm going to visit it like so. Then we need to ensure that you select the project that you created. These are the list of projects that I have created in my own application. So I'm going to be selecting code within NestJS social auth, and you can compare that to the name of the project we created here. So I'm going to select it, then I'm going to move to credentials. Then from right here is where we get the Google client ID and secrets. So once we come here, let me go back. See, okay. So once we come here, we need to get the client ID, right? Which I'm just going to put in. I'm going to create a file right here. Let me create a file here. Let me say touch an environment variable file. And I'm going to call it Google Client ID, Google Client ID. We need this in our backend application, please. So the next thing I need is the Google secrets, Google Client secrets. Client secrets. Because we don't have access to this guy here, so I'm just going to add a new one, and I'm going to copy it like so. Now that we have those two in place, we need to go back to our backend and open our Auth service. This is where we'll be needing those set of parameters. So I'm going to need a private. We need to create a client that we'll be using to communicate with our Google service or Google API. So clients. Okay, no problem. Let's just leave it at that. So this will be new Google OAuth client. So I'm going to import the Google from the Google API that we installed earlier. Google API. Now this will be expecting to have access to the Google Client ID or Google Clients. Yes, to the Google Client ID. Let me just process .env. Let me pick that up. Google Client ID. Good. Google Auth or to. Okay. Okay, this should be Google API. Google APIs. Yes, this APIs. Yes. So this will be new. The Google that we've imported, the new one, Auth, then OAuth 2. Sorry, it should be OAuth 2. Okay. Now that we've initiated our Google OAuth client, we need to start using it. So the first thing usage we are going to need it for is for validating the ID token that will be sent to us by the client. Validate Google ID token, and I will be calling it ID token, and it will be a string. Yeah, this will be returning. Let's just say it will be returning email of the user. Let's say name. Email will be string. Let me just make it email for now. Okay. Let's get into it. So the first thing we need to do is const response, which will be await this dot client dot verify ID token. Now I need to wrap this into a try and catch block. Try catch block. Like so. I'm going to copy this and move it into that try and catch block. I'm going to console log any form of error, and I also want to throw new unauthorized exception. Exception, let's say unable to verify token, right? Or let me just say bad request exception. Now that we have that, next thing we need to do is we need to check if the token that has been given to us is has the necessary parameter. So this is also going to accept an audience. Let's say it's actually expecting an object. So the first one is the ID token, then it's expecting an audience, which is going to be process.env.our Google client's ID. Now we need to check if we need to get the payload that is the payload that is associated to this particular response or login ticket. If you look at this login ticket, we can see it has a payload and it has an envelope. You can call the get payload ID or get user ID and the likes. So what I'm going to be calling is the get payload, or let me call this login ticket actually. Login ticket dot get payload. And if our payload is unknown or not valid, we can return invalid token response like so. Otherwise, we need to return it back to the user payload.email. And also I need to set this as string and make it optional. This can also include payload.name and also picture of the user payload.picture. I'll set this as string and also as string. Okay, optional and optional. Okay, so that's because, okay, let me just remove all of this, but you get the gist. You can get all of those parameters from that payload if it is supplied by Google. So now that we've gotten our Google client ID, we are validating the ID token. The next thing we need to do is we need to go to we need to create another method actually called Google login. So I'm just going to create another method, async await, call it Google login. And the Google login will be expecting the ID token. And it will be returning an object access token. Or let me just use any for now. Any. So for that, we need to get our user data. And we need to validate the ID token. This dot validate Google ID token. So if everything is all good, so once we get that, the next thing is we want to check if there is a user that exists with that particular email address. So this dot user service dot find by email, that will be user data dot email. It should be an await dot email, and we want to check if the user is available. If the user is not available, what we are going to do is we are going to create a new user. This dot user service dot create user, which is basically the method we created earlier. Otherwise, we return the. So if the user is already available, then no problem, right? So the next thing we need to do now is we need to sign a payload or JWT for the user. So const payload payload will be user ID and user.id. There should be an await. Thank you. And this will be email address of the user. Oh, we are checking if the user they don't promise. Okay, they should be promise. Await, sorry. Okay, we are good. So this is the payload we want to sign. So we are going to return an access token now. Access token, and which is going to be this.jwt service.sign that payload. Now that we have that in place, the next thing we want to do is we want to add to our controller and create a method to actually interact. So post, it will be a post, and I'll call it Google, and import it from NestJS common. I'm going to create an async method and call it Google Auth. And the Google Auth, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to accept a body with parameter called ID token, like so. Then once we retrieve it, the next thing we want to do is we want to call, okay, we need to create a constructor. Sorry, constructor. Yeah, and import the auth service in the constructor. So we want to say auth service.google login, passing the ID token, and just return the response like so. I don't know why save value promise any. Okay, so let's set this. Let's say access token to be of type string. Correct. Okay, then if we come back here now, then we should be good. All right, good. So now we are done with our backend for now. The next thing we need to go back to now is our client application. We need to start calling our backend from our client application. So for that, I'm going to add to our main.js, and I'm going to be calling, so const the backend URL, which should be localhost. Let me say localhost port 3000. There should be HTTP, like so. Yeah, slash. Yeah, that's all. So that's our backend URL, right? URL. Now that we've retrieved our backend URL, the next thing we want to do now is I actually want to get auth, or we want to initiate auth for our client side, right? So const auth equals to get auth. I'm passing the Firebase application. We need to import the auth here. Get auth. So we need to import get auth from Firebase auth. Okay, we also need to retrieve Google Auth provider and also sign in with pop-up. Okay, so the way you are going to do it might be quite different if you are doing, depending on the application you are using. Maybe it's React or Vue, but I intentionally kept it simple like this so that everyone can follow. So the next thing I want to do is auth.use device language. So because I'm English, const provider, I'm using English. I'm initiating a new Google Auth provider. Then we need to get our sign in button, which is going to be document.get element by ID, index sign up button. Okay. Now that we've done that, I need to add an event listener. So anytime the button is clicked, I need to call the function like so. And if I do console.log clicked, right? If I come here now and refresh, okay, I need to restart the client application. npm run dev, refresh. If I click on this and check our console, you can see we are getting that console right there. So what we want to do is when this button is clicked, we want to raise the sign up button, pop-up. We want to call this sign with pop-up. So this needs to accept the auth that we created earlier, and it also needs to accept the provider. Then after that, we need to append a then on it. So it will return us a result, maybe the user credentials and the like. So let's console log that result. If I refresh and it, so you can see this pop-up you are going to get. So the user has to accept that they want to actually sign up. So you can see Google will allow code within NestJS application to access info such as name, profile picture, and the likes, and email address. So continue. Now you can see we are getting some certain parameter. So you can see we are getting my display name, we are getting my email address, and we are getting the likes. So the next thing I want to do now is we want to use the credential or the result that has been gotten for us to retrieve certain credential. So const credentials, and that will be the Google Auth provider we imported dot gets or credentials from results. Now this credentials contains our ID token and some access token, but all we need is the ID token. So const ID token, and we need to send the ID token to our backend, remember. So we need to create a method to call the backend, send ID token to backend. So ID token like so. So I'm going to create that method and I'm going to apply an await right here, await. I'm going to make this async. Okay, so let's create a method. Async function send ID token to backend. So once we have that, I'm going to be using fetch API to call the backend URL. So fetch API, and we are going to pass everything that we need. So this will be our backend URL slash the route that we are calling. That means auth/Google. And it's going to take in some initialization method, body, and the body will be the ID token, and headers, content type, application.json, accept application.json. Okay, so once we have that, the next thing we want to apply a then to retrieve the results. So if the response is okay, Okay, so hold on. To retrieve the results, then we want to return. So I want to make this arrow function. I'm just going to return the response.json, which is going to also now need, I don't need this. We're going to now need another then. Something is wrong. Okay. Okay, so we need another then function and console log result. So this will now contain the data we are expecting from backend. So I'm just going to say backend response like so. And I'm going to attach a catch block, console.log error, like so. So now let's refresh, call. Okay, so we can see our connection refused. That's because we've not started the backend application. So I'm going to run the backend application, npm run start dev. Okay, what's the correct package.json? It's correct now. Let me see, where are we? npm run start dev. Okay, so maybe I probably made a spelling error or something earlier. So our application is compiling. Hopefully there is no error. Oh, unfortunately, we have an error in our application. Let me see, user service. Please make sure user repository at index 0 is available for user module. So the reason why we are getting this error is because we didn't register our typeorm or register our service for our user entity to be able to inject that repository. So we import the user like so, then let's the application refresh. Okay, now our application has refreshed. So you can see we have the Auth controller right here, the the endpoint right here from the Auth controller. So if I refresh now and sign in with Google, so we can see we are getting blocked origin. So let me check the network tab. Cause error. We are getting cause error. So in order to prevent cause error, all we need to do is come to main.ts and say app.enable cause, then set it up. Origin, I'll say any origin, and credentials, I'll just say false. Yeah, so let's refresh and try to sign in again. Oh yeah, so we can see that we are getting backend response now. We are getting that JWT token. If we inspect that JWT token, let me see if I can retrieve it right there. Copy it and go to JWT.io, JWT.io, and paste in that token. So you can see we have all of these details inside our JWT token. No, that's wrong. Google. So I was copying the payload instead of the response. So I'm supposed to copy the response. Supposed to copy the JWT response. Or let me just copy it in our console. Console. Okay. Okay. So let me come back to our JWT. So we can see we have the correct claims now. We have just the user ID and the email. Then when it was issued and when the JWT will expire. So yeah, That is how you actually authenticate users with Google using Firebase or OAuth or whatever. So if we compare that to what we did, you can see now we are checking if the user exists right before registering them, or to the flow. We are checking if the user exists. So if the user does not exist, you just create it. You can actually just duplicate this as sign up, or just use the same API actually, because for sign up, that is when you create the user credentials, right? But we don't really need that, right? We don't really need that. So you can use the same method to do your sign in and sign up. So what you can just do is probably maybe for sign up, you don't return this access token depending on your application requirements, right? That's what will determine how you are going to go about things. So, and that is it. We have successfully built a Google sign in and sign up with NestJS and Firebase. Compared to Passport.js, this method is simpler, lighter, and easier to maintain. You now have a system where users can log in with Google. Their accounts get stored in with your database, and you can protect your API routes with JWT authentication. If you found this tutorial helpful, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment. If you'd like me to expand this into a full authentication system with refresh token, roles, and permission, let me know. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video that I will be creating. Bye.